Want to begin today by saying that today's Torah study is being sponsored by Audrey Lyon and Jeff Weintraub in honor of their daughter Naomi Rose Weintraub's birthday. She's turning 24. And happy and healthy birthday for Naomi, and Mazal Tov to her parents. It's no small thing to be able to raise children in health and maturity. And I can't, I'm not so good with gematria, but I love the challenge of it. And so 24 is Kad, Chaf Dalid, which, among other things, it means a container, a jar or a container, or I'm stretching a little bit to say a vessel. And one of the ways that's meaningful to me, at least, is in in my travels, in my work, the times that I can say to myself, "You're just a container. You're just a vessel for something else to pour through." Those have been the most satisfying moments for me. So I wish the same for Naomi, to discover those transcendent moments when her art can pour through her and nourish the world. Okay, this is now Parashat Lech Lecha, a parasha that needs at least a month of weeks in order to fully, or even, I don't know, partially begin to absorb and digest. There are a number of very big things that happen this week. I'm trying in our Torah study this year to discipline myself to stay with the latter part of the parashiot, because we're reading the third triennial sections this year. So I'm looking at the latter part of Parashat Lech Lecha, not the beginning. And I'd like to look with you today at chapter 17. And give me 1 second just to pull up the right here. Okay. Chapter 17 of Genesis, and I'm going to skip over my title and come back to it later and explain to you what I mean by that title. I have a big chunk of Torah text here that I want to read through with you. It's a fair bit longer than we often look at, but it's all meant to help us look at the ancient Jewish practice of circumcision, Brit Milah. Actually, I would rather say Brit Milah. Circumcision is a medical procedure. Brit Milah is a religious ritual that includes a medical procedure, but which has is meant to have a much bigger meaning for us. And I guess I was drawn to this in particular because, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is the only physical kind of primal ritual that goes all the way back to the beginning of the Torah, which is still in practice. I guess what I'm saying is I'm differentiating that from, say, the many detailed verses about ritual sacrifice, which we no longer practice. But circumcision, Brit Milah, is one that has stayed with our people through maybe as long as 3,000 years. And when we look into a little bit of the history about it, there's some historical background even in our Plaut Chumash about it. It's clear that it was practiced in ancient times by many different peoples and has been over the centuries. But I think in our time has come to be more closely associated with Jewish identity as a spiritual practice than with others. Okay, so with that, let's look at the text. And then I have some commentaries I'd like to roll through with you. I wish there was a way for me to move. Is there no way for me to move this over? Ah, yes, there is. There. Okay. Okay, chapter 17. And just for context, the piece that we're looking at now is right after Sarai, still at this point, has been unable to conceive, and she puts Hagar in bed with Avram still at this point, and Hagar conceives, and in the process of her becoming pregnant, there is a rift between her and Sarai. And then just before this verse, chapter 17, verse 1, it says that Hagar has given birth to Ishmael. Hagar has given birth, and Avram names the child Ishmael and says to Sarai, do whatever you want with her, I'm staying out of it, which turns out to be quite a different moment of drama. Okay, now, at this moment now, Avram is going to have another theophany, another moment where he experiences God in that most immediate and full way. Vayhi Avram ben tishim shana v'tesha shanim. He's 99 years old. Vayera Adonai el Avram. God appeared to Avram and says to him, Ani El Shaddai. I'm now naming myself El Shaddai. Hitalech lefanai v'heyeh tamim. Hitalech lefanai, literally walk before me. We see the translation here, walk in my ways. Walk before me, walk in this path. V'heyeh tamim, and be perfect, be blameless. And this phrase, hitalech lefanai v'heyeh tamim, is used by several commentators to say, already here, the message is about circumcision. The message is, in order for you to be tamim, you will have to complete this physical process of perfection. But before we get there, first we're going to hear some important language about the word brit. Ve'etna briti, God says, I will give you my covenant, establish it between me uveinecha and your children. Va'arbe otcha bima'od be'od, you will increase very many. You will have many, many descendants. Avram hears this. It says, Vayipol Avram al panav, he falls on his face. And God speaks to him further. Ani hine briti itach, v'hayita la'av hamon goyim. This is now my covenant with you, briti, with you, my covenant with you. You are going to be the father of hamon goyim, many, many nations. And because of that, you're now no longer going to be called Avram, but rather Avraham, ki av hamon goyim netaticha. You're going to get that extra syllable in your name to indicate this covenant that's between us. And the covenant is that you're going to be the father of many. You're going to be very fruitful, and nations and kings will come forth from you. I'm skipping down a little bit. V'hakimoti et briti beini uvein necha uvein zaracha acharecha ledorotam. This covenant will be not only between me and you, but also between your offspring, between the seed that goes forth from you for many generations. Livrit olam, an everlasting covenant. Okay, I'm going to skip down now. Verse 10. Zot briti asher tishmeru, beini uveinechem, uvein zaracha acharecha. Himol lachem kol zachar. So in order to concretize this brit, so that it's not just an abstraction, it's not just kind of some language that's floating in the air, there's going to be a specific physical ritual required of you. And that ritual is circumcision. Himol lachem kol zakar. All males that come forth from you should be circumcised. Unemaltem et basar orlatchem v'haya leot brit beini uveinechem. You will circumcise the flesh of the orla, the bit of, in this case, skin that gets removed and tossed away. And this will then be an ot brit, a sign of the covenant between me and between all of your children. And it even goes on to say, verse 12, Uvein shmonat yamim. There's not only a specific procedure that's required here, but there's a specific time that this procedure should happen. It should happen on the 8th day. kol zachar ladorotechem. Excuse me. Giving some even further language about who's included in this. Now verse 13. Himol yimol yalid beitcha umiknat kaspecha, etc. And then look at the last sentence, verse 14. Ve'arel zachar asher lo yimol et basar orlato v'nichreta hanefesh hahi. If there's any male in the community who does not perform this ritual, I'm sure that no pun was intended here, but it's impossible not to see it now. V'nichreta hanefesh hahi. That person will be cut off. Me'ameha et briti hafer. That person has broken the covenant and will be cut off. And it's important for us to remember that karet, this word, nichrata, karet, the status of being cut off from the community would have meant death. I mean, there was no way to survive outside your community. It's not like today where you can just say, okay, I'll join another synagogue. What do I care? It's in that time, it really was quite existential. Okay. And then I just skipped here to the very end of the parasha, which reifies this important language about the covenant being upheld through the act of circumcision. The brit is upheld through brit milah. Okay, so just look here. This is just reinforcing some of the earlier verses of Avraham ben Tishim v'tesha shana behimolo basar orleto. He was 99 years old when he went through this procedure. V'Yishmael beno ben 13 shana. Ishmael is 13 years old. Behimolo et basar orleto. He is bar mitzvah age when he has this, comes into this covenant. And so we're left with this as a most essential commandment from God in order to maintain this relationship. So again, I just was so drawn to this because, you know, to just pause and think of all the various rituals that have come and gone during the evolution of the Jewish people. It really is something that this one, which, you know, I can't speak personally, but I gather isn't really that comfortable to undergo. As far as we know, it heals fully, and men can go on with their lives productively and fruitfully. But it is just remarkable that through all the phases of history, of Western history, this most primal, most visceral, most physical ritual is still maintained. And being a parent of 3 sons, at least I have that particular connection to it. And I have more to share about that. Okay, so some traditional commentary about this. First, to start with Sforno. Le'ot brit, he's commenting on verse 11. Le'ot, an ot is a sign or a symbol. It also means a letter, but in this case, a sign or a symbol of the brit. Zikaron timidi lalechet bidrachav, bioto kechotam ha'adon be'avdo. Almost like the stamp on the skin of a slave, identifying him as belonging to a certain master. And I realized that for us, the word slave or slavery is so laden with so much, I think, a different kind of trauma than the slavery of this time and the slavery of the Bible, for sure. So I want to, I'm not saying in any way that I think slavery ever was okay, but in this particular case, as we know from reading some of the texts later in the Torah, in biblical times, slaves did have certain rights. They were considered under the protection of their master, whatever that might have meant. So I don't think we need to read this quite as traumatically as we do with the overlay of, you know, the moral stain of American slavery, you know, on our prescription glasses. Okay, let's go on. I had to smile when I saw this. Look at the Hebrew and look at the English. And this again, this is I think this is the William Davidson translation. This is how much you need to understand. The all the unbolded part is what you would need to know in order to make sense out of this little passage here. Again, playing with this word ot, a sign, um, a symbol. Okay, so in the original language of the Talmud, Ella Amar Rabbi Elazar, Atya ot ot. So to give the fuller picture of what's being said here, in the middle of a discussion, Rabbi Elazar said, this halacha is derived by means of a verbal analogy between the word ot, sign, that appears with regard to circumcision. And here they're going to quote one of our verses from above. And you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, and shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. And sign, ot, that appears with regard to Shabbat. Like, think about it, we say, ot hi le'ome'ad, we say of Shabbat. She is a sign for all eternity, beini uveinech. Between, God is saying, between God and all of us. Shabbat itself is a sign. So they're saying, however, you shall keep my Shabbatot, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, giving us the quote from Exodus 31. From this verbal analogy, it is derived that circumcision, which is also an ot, may be performed even on Shabbat, which is itself an ot. So there's no other Jewish, well, excuse me, bar mitzvah happens on Shabbat, but weddings don't happen on Shabbat. Funerals never on Shabbat. A brit milah must be done on the 8th day. So if the 8th day is Shabbat, fine with me. Here comes the moil, and we do it if the baby is well. So just showing that connection between the brit of brit milah and the ot, of Shabbat. Okay, and then a little bit from the Zohar. I have been going through my own Zohar Chavruta for the last few years, where my partner and I are sort of delighting and incredulous that it's taken us 4 years to get through Parashat Breshit. We've been going slowly, admittedly, but we have been sort of overwhelmed. We're 2 women, and we've been sort of overwhelmed with the amount of time, even in Parashat Breshit. We're not talking about Lech Lecha even. It's just the first parasha of the Torah, mostly just the story of creation. The authors of the Zohar are really preoccupied with circumcision. They're really interested in it. They really want to uphold the importance of it. So this is a little piece from, actually not from Parashat Breshit, but from the Zohar, which says to us, as long as a person bears the mark of this holy sign, meaning this physical stamp, from it he perceives the Holy One, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, literally. This is because only when a man is circumcised can he be imbued with a holy soul. This is the Zohar speaking, not me. If he is worthy and guards the covenant, the Shekhinah will not depart from him. So as long as a male in the Jewish community is circumcised, he will always have that earthly presence of God with him as wherever he goes. And if he misses out on this important ritual, he will lose that connection. Okay. So now we're going to get into a little bit about milah, not only on the male generative organ, but milah as it appears in several places for several different parts of our body. And we talked about this, I couldn't remember when it came up, but it came up recently, and a few weeks ago, or maybe during the summer, I'm just not remembering. We read some of these same commentaries, which point to the different kinds of circumcision that our tradition suggests. Okay, so now David Kimchi, Unamaltem. So he's quoting again from chapter 17:11, which we just read above. The positive commandment to the father to circumcise his male child, or to the son to perform circumcision on himself, if it has not been performed on him before then by the court. And I'll just scroll back up. My title here is My Wife Insists. My Wife Insists. So there is this custom that the father is supposed to perform the circumcision on his son, and the moil comes to say to the father, is it okay with you if I step in and handle this for you? And my husband's response each time was, my wife insists. So that's where my title comes from. Just trying to inject a bit of humor here. Okay, this carrying on now with David Kimchi, Le'ot Brit, the sign of the covenant. Although there are other symbolic acts which are signs of the covenant and the obligation to keep the laws of the Torah, such as the tefillin, the talit, the Shabbat, this symbol is by far the most potent one, the only one to be performed on one's body. The other signs are only a reminder. This is the only such sign to be performed on one's body. Sorry, I said before that this commentary was going to talk about the different kinds of milah. I'm wrong. That's coming up. This one is important, so let's tune in here and hear what he has to say. This is the only such sign, as I just read, to be performed on one's body. Seeing that this is so, the Torah chose to select the reproductive organ of the male. Seeing that most of the sins one commits are somehow related to this organ and involve misuse of that organ. It is the organ which, unless handled with care, is apt to allow the bestial party of the human being to come to the surface, weakening the aspect of our nature which wishes to cling to godliness. When looking at that part of one's body, one reminds oneself automatically that God has forbidden Jews to engage in recreational sexual activities. I have more to say about this. In mating with partners which the Torah has forbidden, a lot to say about that. And then he ends by saying this thing about sexual emissions, which we completely reject also. But this part right here, David Kimchi says, this physical oat, the fact that it's on the man's body, will help him remember that this most powerful part of his body can only be used for holiness, can only be used for love, can never be used, as my teacher taught me, can never be used for violence or for coercion. So we don't follow Kimchi's, thinking here about this oat, this symbol being a reminder that, that you're not allowed to have whatever love in your life you're meant to have. We say you are. We don't reject homosexuality, obviously, and we don't even reject sex for the purpose of joy. But we do hold on to this important teaching that he offers us, which is to say, in response to any man who feels the impulse of violence or coercion against his partner, this circumcision, this brit milah on his body should remember him that God is in the room. God is participating here, and he better watch his behavior. Women don't have the same physical power through this organ as men do. So we don't have the same ritual for ourselves. We have to be just as mindful as men do about using our bodies only for holiness and for love. But this commentary is so important, and you see that it's still, even though it's an old commentary, it's still speaking right to our time, because of course sexual violence is still very much a reality in our time. So I was so drawn to this because it brought me back to this commentary. It brought me back to time studying with my teacher, Rabbi Marcia Prager. As I say her name, I'll just say again, lifting her name up with prayers for healing, as she's in a very serious medical state right now. She was one of the ones that taught us this commentary, that oat, that sign on a man's body, is there to hold him in holiness and in rightness. and recognizing that our human impulses don't always help us land there. Okay. This is the commentary that I wanted to look at with you that just lays out for us the various ways that circumcision of different parts of our body is requested of us. So they're quoting here from the Midrash Breshit Rabbah. I'm going to skip down here. From where should he be circumcised? So they're using the same verse, Genesis 17, verse 11, you shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, but they're stretching it now. Stretching the skin? No. From where should he be circumcised? If he is circumcised from the ear, he is not fit to offer sacrifices. From the mouth, he is not fit. From the heart, he is not fit. Where should he be circumcised so that he will be able to offer the sacrifices? From the foreskin of the body. So they're saying here in the Midrash that male circumcision is required for ritual participation. But Rabbi Akiba comes and says, actually, there are 4 foreskins. There's the ear, which needs to be circumcised so that we can fully hear. There's the mouth, which needs to be circumcised so that we can fully speak. And you can see the quotes that they're bringing here from Jeremiah and, of course, famously from Exodus, quoting Moses, when Moses is asked to come forward and speak for the people to carry out God's command. He says, I'm uncircumcised. But going on here, foreskin could also be said with regard to the heart. And quoting Jeremiah, it comes up in other places too. All the house of Israel are uncircumcised of the heart. We're supposed to go through some kind of process of opening our heart, of circumcising our heart so that we can fully feel what we need to feel. Sorry. This topic is making me feel a little nervous. Foreskin is said with regard to the body. A male who is uncircumcised, quoting back to the section we were reading earlier, it was said to him, walk in my ways and be blameless. Remember that verse that we read way up at the top. Hitalech lefanai v'heyeh tamim. They're going to go on here and say if a person is, they're arguing with each other. But I want us to hold on to Akiba, who organizes all the different kinds of circumcision, which of course are valuable to us because not all of us have the same male organ. So it's really meaningful for us to be able to participate in this perfecting of ourselves through this opening. Okay, this Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer is very much reaffirms what we just read. So I'm going to skip over this and I'm going to hold off the last thing for now. Let me pause here and just see what questions or comments are coming up as we roll through these texts. Myrna, please go ahead. Just don't forget to unmute as you speak. Myrna, are you able to unmute?
What's not clear is, are these the circumcision of these other bodily parts, the ear, heart? It's symbolic, or is it meant to be physical? There's no detail, and I'm just curious about how it is viewed.
Yeah, I have always understood it as it has to be symbolic because unlike Brit Milah, the circumcision of the male organ, which heals beautifully and allows for full functioning, some would even say enhanced functioning. If we were to do these procedures on our other body parts, it might heal, but it would only cause damage, and it doesn't allow us to function well. So it has to be understood on a symbolic level. And I would add that I think as we age and experience different chapters of our lives, we feel these circumcisions in different ways. I mean, how many of us have been through an experience that cuts our heart right open? and oftentimes in a painful way, but a way that helps us to feel more vividly, more fully, whatever life is bringing us. So I think we have to understand it on that symbolic level, except for the Brit Milah that we originally talked about.
But there's no ritual. There's no ritual. Is there any ritual that's prescribed? No. So it really is totally symbolic. Yeah.
It is totally symbolic, but I have to say, Myrna, listening to you, the question that you're asking, I think it's not the same. I'm thinking of, when we are able to witness a Brit Milah, a baby boy on the 8th day, let's say, or whatever age the child has to be. There's a whole liturgy around it. There's a whole tradition of different kinds of participants. We invoke the presence of Elijah the prophet. I mean, there's a whole ceremony, as you all know. We don't have such ceremonies around these other moments, these other experiences, though I understand the other circumcisions that we're talking about, of the heart, the ear, the mouth. Those are brought about by our life experiences, and maybe on some level you could attach them to the Gomel prayer that we say, the prayer that we say when we've come through a narrow bridge experience that has left us cut open in some way. Maybe there's a beginning of some liturgical connection there to mark it, to say, oh, just got my heart circumcised. Here I am to tell about it. Okay, Shlomo, and then folks, if you would be willing to use the hand raise function, I can make sure then I catch everybody, because I really would like to, catch you. So Shlomo, go ahead, and then.
I guess my first question would be is how do I use the hand raising thing? I was looking for it on chat and I was looking for it on participants and I
If
couldn't
you
find
look
how.
under reactions, you should see.
Oh, I see it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I've thought about this a lot and I have some things to say about it. I think it's a mistake to translate the word as circumcise.
Mm.
And I think it has to be translated as open. And circumcision is the act of opening the male organ.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think of the word port in English, a port is an opening where things go in and out. And it's the same root, namal, mem vav lamed, as this root, which we're using to circumcise. Now, one of the things I think it's very important that this be translated as open, rather than, because when you talk about your ear, you don't circumcise your ear, you open your ear so you can hear. You don't have uncircumcised or circumcised lips. You have a closed mouth, and the idea is to open your mouth. And the same thing with your heart. And so the other thing that I think is very important is, what is the basic value that separates Abraham from everybody around him? Mm-hmm. He sits at his tent and he is open to welcome others. And I think that's very important here. And with regard to the last paragraph of the Shema, U'reitem u'zachartem, the tzitzit you have to have on you so you can see it and remember. But circumcision, every time a man goes to urinate, he's being reminded. And the genius of choosing this, and this is a little joke here, that as men get older and become more forgetful, they go to the bathroom 3 or 4 times a night and are reminded more often to remember the commandments and to fulfill them.
The covenant.
So I think and the other thing is, when we look at the word karban, which means is translated as sacrifice, because this is such a dramatic event, we lose the original meaning of karban, which is to bring close to. And so the act of sacrificing has become what karban means, because it's such a dramatic thing, but it really means to draw close to God. Yes. And the same thing has happened to the word mul, to circumcise, because this is such a dramatic act. Instead of the larger meaning of opening, we now translate it as to circumcise. So that's what I want to say.
Kol hakavod. I love the connection with namal and the port.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's an opening.
Okay. All right. I'm just going by the hands I see. I'm so glad to have all this input. So Beth, going to you first, and then Marcia or Kevin or both of you, and Carol, Nechama, and Steve. Great.
So I was struck by the commentary saying that the sort of the most important or the most frequent violations are related to the penis, because I think about the al and I feel like most violations are related to words or speech. Exactly. So, I mean, I work primarily with sexual violence survivors, so I'm thrilled with this idea that this is the most important thing that we should be looking at, and cautioning men against, don't use your penis for violence. This is, I mean, from a work perspective, I'm like, absolutely, that's the most important thing, but not from my knowledge, small knowledge of liturgy, which just feels like it's all about the mouth.
Right. So thank you. Kol hakavod. So for sure, um, the liturgy of Yom Kippur, of the Vidui, the Al is mostly centered on um, chataim, whatever, transgressions that are related to speech, just as you're saying. I just lost you. Where are you, Beth? There you are. Okay. And how wonderful, because of course, at least half of us wouldn't be able to relate to a liturgy that only spoke about, transgressions of the male organ. What I understand that commentary to be saying more is, if you're looking for a reason why you should uphold this procedure for baby boys, here's why. Not that it replaces the importance of looking at our behavior in all different ways, for sure, through our speech and even through our thoughts. Yeah, thank you. I don't know if others want to respond. If you want to respond to each other, one of the downsides of this setup is that it's hard to do that. But if you do, yeah, Marcia, go ahead.
Okay, I'm so glad that Beth said that, because that was the question I had. I know Brit Milah comes from the root himol. On the other hand, it hits you in the face that it's the Hebrew word milah. And then when we were mentioning oat, a letter, it seems to me that there are hints here of exactly what you and Beth are saying, that that it really is about a covenant of the word, and
Mhm.
as well as of the body. So
Yeah,
I think it's there. And I mean, I don't know if the commentators took off on that, but
that's fabulous. I didn't see anything in the commentary about it, but that doesn't mean it's not there. So just for people that may not know, milah, Brit milah, but also the word milah means word. Am I spelling it incorrectly? I don't think
oat
so.
means letter. So
Right, ot and
right.
letter and milah is word. So uh, the relationship between this visceral ritual and language, as sort of Beth brought up just now, and now Marcia, you're asking about. Um, Marcia or Kevin, anything else? Yeah, go ahead,
Just
Kevin.
a quick story and then a question.
Mhm.
We were blessed to have our third grandchild, and I was the sandak at his bris, and I
Mhm.
was wearing my talit. And during the period when the Brit Milah was performed, he was reaching out and he grabbed the tzitzit of my talit and was holding the tzitzit during the period that he was circumcised. It
Mm.
was a very meaningful moment for me. Now, my question is, we seem to lose an opportunity to do something with the foreskin. I've heard wonderful customs such as burying it in the soil and then
Mhm.
planting a tree with it. Are
Mhm.
there other customs that people have used so that the foreskin isn't just thrown away, if you will, but is still,
Mm.
since man is created perfectly, why don't we do more with it?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if anyone else is aware of a custom. I'm not. I am aware of that one that you just mentioned, of burying it in the earth and planting a tree with it. It was a very common custom to plant a tree when a new baby arrives. Uh, and there's also the word orla, which is the word for the discarded skin, is also new. What's the word for tree husbandry, or what, the care and feeding of trees?
Arbor or something?
An arborist, maybe. I'm not even sure. There's another word I'm looking for. Lo chashuv. But the Torah says, uses the same word orla for the fruit that we're not supposed to eat, that we're supposed to toss away when a tree is young. So kol hakavod. I'm going to keep going here, but I also wanted to, I just peeked at the chat also. And I love, Martha, your suggestion about singing Petach Libi, Open My Heart, at the, perhaps at a covenant ceremony for a baby, or other times too, but especially there. I would love to add that in. And thank you also, Bob Singer and others who have been chiming in here on the chat. Okay, from here, I think we're going to Carol, then Nechama, Mark, Steve, Harriet, David. We're going to get everybody in. Okay, go
Yeah.
ahead, Carol.
Okay, I'll be quick. One is kind of funny. Two things. One is maybe we could use the foreskin for stem cell research.
Hmm.
Okay, that was supposed to be a joke. The other is maybe a word question. Earlier you were talking about the translation is cut off twice,
Mhm.
once in regard to the foreskin and once to the person who's ostracized.
Mhm.
Is it the same verb?
It's different. It's different. The word to be cut off, we translate it as cut off, meaning, as you were saying, ostracized or exiled. Karet is different from milah. Or
Okay. Okay,
yes,
that's all. Thank you.
yeah. Thank you, Carol. Go ahead, Nechama.
When I ask this or say it, I do not mean to be snarky. I promise. This is all about men. So does this mean that women, Jewish women, or women who become Jewish in ancient times, do not have any kind of covenant, are not granted any kind of relationship with God and the nations that come from this? And obviously, I mean, this is part of this whole male thing, like the Orthodox women cannot be included in so many things.
Right.
So obviously we can't be circumcised, but it's just a little disturbing. How do we identify women as Jews, and do we get any kind of covenant with God?
Yeah. Kol hakavod. And I see Kate is asking almost the exact same question. I think, Kate, if I'm getting this right, in the chat. Gil, I saw you had your hand. Were you going to say something about this? If you're speaking to us, we can't hear you. Gil, can you unmute? I can't tell if you're Gil Rosen. No. No. Okay. Well, if you want to say something about this, there's room for you here. I love the question, Nechama and Kate. And I, as I was putting this together, I was thinking, I'm so glad that we're not part of a tradition that in any way advocates for female genital interaction under the Moyle's knife. No, thank you. And of course, it is a I was going to say it's a misogynist tradition. That's unfair because that's looking at it with 21st century eyes, and it's not a 21st century tradition. It was built and developed and evolved over many, many centuries when, of course, women were secondary. Women were not considered required to participate in the mitzvot, and then that became, not only are you not required to, now you're actually not allowed to. So that's a whole snowball of a problem that we have been trying to work with and address, I think with some success in our time. And I think, Kate, you were asking similarly, is there some way that women and girls have a clear covenant opportunity? Can we be included in this covenant? And I think you all are familiar with, or maybe you've been to modern day ceremonies that welcome baby girls. Of course, the idea of a baby naming in the synagogue was initially invented as a response to Brit Milah. It was initially just for girls. When I was little, that's how it was, at least when I was a girl. Now, in our dogged commitment to egalitarianism, now we have baby namings for everybody in the synagogue, whatever their gender is. So we've sort of undone the initial reason for having baby naming for a girl. I'm also thinking that what's the part of Leviticus that says I think it's Tazria, that goes into the details about if a woman gives birth to a boy, she's meant to remain in seclusion for a certain number of days, and I'm forgetting the exact number of days. If she gives birth to a girl, she's considered unfit. She has to remain in seclusion longer. So the fact of a female baby, the fact of a female daughter renders the mother impure longer than if she gives birth to a baby boy. And I don't know if there's any way that that is linked to this this commandment that boys are meant to be circumcised and girls have no physical ritual. I just want to say one last thing about this, which is my mind is going towards the whole question of matrilineal and patrilineal descent. And at some point that switched. At some point earlier, it was patrilineal descent. And I believe it was in the Roman times that it switched to matrilineal descent because there was so much sexual violence and rape. And it was only, you could only really tell who the mother was because at least you knew that she gave birth to that baby. So I'd have to think more about what the direct connection is between those two. But I think it's a really important question that we have to keep asking and keep finding answers to. I guess I'll add my personal opinion unsolicited here, which is that as a mother of sons, I would still say I would hope we hold on to this ancient ritual. I hope that we can find ways for our daughters to be recognized as part of this covenant because they most certainly are. But I'm not sure that I would shut down. I know you're not asking this, but I wouldn't shut down one ritual in order to create that equivalency. But anyway, thank you for the question. Okay, from here we're going to Mark, then David, then Steve, then Harriet, and then Gil.
Wait, what? Okay.
Okay, so it's actually Marilyn who wanted to make a
Oh,
comment.
Marilyn, excuse
I
me.
also wanted to,
It just says Mark Wolf on the screen.
that's okay. I just wanted to see if there was a way to draw a line or a relationship between the fact that if a baby is born by cesarean, then that baby is not eligible for the Pinyat Haben, which always bothered me because I had one child by cesarean. And is it somehow that because the mother has to be cut open to deliver that baby, that there could be some relationship between that and the circumcision, or I can't say what it is, but it just leapt to my mind.
Wow, I was not even familiar with that restriction. So just for those that don't know, Marilyn's referring to Pidyon Haben, which is an old ritual of quote unquote redemption of the firstborn, where the parents would, or the father, I guess, would make a certain monetary gift to the synagogue in order to be able to retain the child. So the child is not given over to the priesthood. And just to dwell on Pidyon Haben for a second, I'm brought back to a Torah discussion we had at least 20 years ago about Pidyon Haben. And the thrust of the discussion was, we don't need that ritual anymore. We know that all of our children are important, not only the firstborn, and we don't want to single out the firstborn and give all the kids a complex about birth order. I agree, except I believe it was Carol Feder at the time who said, except the firstborn is the one who makes the parents into parents, and in some families who makes the grandparents into grandparents. And so that's something to be honored and recognized. The connection you're drawing between the cesarean, a baby born by cesarean cannot be redeemed, basically, is what you're saying. I don't know. It's a great question. And you're saying, could it be somehow related that the mother was not, quote unquote, cut open in bringing that child into the world? Thank you. Thank you. It's a really interesting place to go. Okay, I'm continuing now. I think that Harriet, is it Harriet or Clem? Don't forget to unmute.
In some ways it was both of us, and I don't want to be repetitive because many have referred to the thing that caught our interest, but we also were thinking about all the transgressions were about the male. But bringing it forward, because I don't want to repeat much of what we both would agree with in terms of, although Clem had to leave the room for a bit, about what was said. But what just occurred to me was in terms of cutting off or cutting out, the rules of impurity for women wasn't just, it was about the monthly menstrual cycle. Yes. And having to, in ancient times, you had to leave the community. And in very modern times, you re-enter the family unit, certainly a sexual relationship, by going to the mikveh. So I just, I don't want to belabor that and take time away from others, but it really made me think a lot about other ways we include or cut off.
And that women have their own ways of relating to all of this through some of the examples you just gave.
Yes.
Excellent.
Thank you. Okay, let's keep going.
Yeah.
I think, sorry, Steve, then David, then Chana. And Chana will give you the last word.
So the main point I was going to make was already covered in talking about the lack of any kind of covenant with the female in all this, because of the male domination of those who wrote all this and those who lived it, so to speak. But the comment about the ear, the lips, and the heart, if they're put together, then it has to be viewed as symbolic, obviously, because you're not going to physically clip the heart, whereas you could actually do something to the lips and the ear. In fact, if it had been more egalitarian, or whatever the right term is, gender neutral, perhaps a little snip of the ear would have been medically possible and would be a visible sign of the covenant, where the foreskin is clearly a not a visible sign unless you're living in a nudist colony, so to speak. So I'll leave it there, and with only a PS to Kevin that of course there's the rare custom of using the foreskins for tiny wallets, and if he's interested in a follow-up to that, I will stay on to give the punchline.
Oh, you're not being serious about that, right?
No, but I don't know. Should I just give you the punchline?
No. We're gonna go on. But I thought what you just said really brought up a new question for me, at least, which is, let's see. It says in the Torah and several other places that this ritual of circumcision, or if we want to use Shlomo's language of opening, involves physical mutilation. I mean, it involves permanently altering our physical form. And I never thought about it this way before, but the codes, the system of Jewish law is clear that any other kind of physical mutilation is forbidden. Ear piercings are forbidden. Tattooing is forbidden. Even cremation, as we know, is forbidden, because we're not allowed to alter the form that we're given at birth, the form that we're given, even whatever, at conception. Except this one form of permanent mutilation is considered essential to complete us. And it says that it's necessary to perfect you for a man or a boy. And without it, we go through life, kind of in some weird way maimed, when we don't have that, when boys and men don't have this circumcision. And I think that's so interesting. I mean, obviously, most of us have rejected the thing about piercing, and many of us have rejected the thing about tattoos, and many of us have also rejected the piece about cremation, but it stands as a classical rabbinic response to altering the body in any way. Let's see. David. Oh, Gil. I didn't get you in there. Gil Rosen. Let me go. David, hang on 1 second.
It was just the point about nidah, that this is a woman's responsibility, but it's circumcision is a great deal about controlling sexuality, and the woman's nidah is also part of that, and is part of the woman's responsibility. Somebody else said that, and it's a really important part of traditional Judaism, which we don't practice, most of it. Modern liberal Jews don't practice, but it's a very important responsibility, mainly of the woman.
Woman, right. So
We're
just
talking about
again,
women's responsibilities.
family purity laws. So women's responsibility to monitor her own menstrual flow and to regulate her physical interaction with her spouse according to that flow. And even, as we know, in some communities, even to go to the rabbi to be sure, to show the rabbi, am I ready to return to my husband now? We don't view the menstrual cycle in that way of impurity. I can't help but say, the few times that I've spoken with a more traditional practicing woman about this, the answer I've gotten is, it's been the best thing for my marriage, having some of this separation time and some of this reunion time. Thank you for bringing that up, Gil. Okay, David, and then Hannah, and then we'll wrap up for today.
What I was thinking was kind of in line with what you said a minute or two ago, Rachel. If we're made in the image of God, why on earth do we, in this one instance and only in this one instance, decide that we're going to be better if we mutilate ourselves and away from this image of God we were born into? It makes no sense to me.
Mm-hmm. It defies modern logic, that's for sure. I don't think I have a better answer for you than that. For sure, that, I mean, you all are more medically trained than I am, I'm sure. There was some feeling, at least in the past, that there was a hygienic or medical benefit to going through this procedure. We know nowadays that it's possible to be perfectly clean and hygienic without it. But perhaps like kashrut, it began as a way to maintain, I was going to say, not sanity, but sanitation, sanitary living. Okay, Hannah, and then wrapping up. Go ahead.
So I just wanted to bring up that actually the secular Jews in Israel started to do the egalitarian thing for girls. They have a party, very close. It's not exactly 8 days. Unfortunately, they call it Brita, which really, but they started to do it without even thinking about it, that they are actually very egalitarian about it. They want to respect the new girl. So that's what they do.
So,
I
but
just wanted to bring it up.
yeah, thank you. I didn't know that it was such a movement among the secular. It makes sense. But you're not saying that they do anything physical to the girl.
No. They just, because there is Brit Milah, they call it Brita. I cringe when they say it. So some say Simchat Bat, but what I wanted to say that it's very common now to do it, and it's very egalitarian without even thinking about it. So I just wanted to bring it up.
Okay, thank you. I don't know what's wrong with Brita, just because it's grammatically.
Because it reminds me the women mutilation. That's all.
I see.
For me, but so that's why I don't like the name. Yeah.
Chas v'shalom, never ever.
Yeah, chas v'shalom, and they don't mean it even. It just that's me.
Yeah. Thank you so much for all of your wonderful thoughts, the ones that were spoken out loud and the ones that were shared in the chat. This is a pretty complex topic to discuss, and clearly one that is centrally important to our Torah and to our tradition. I want to say one couple of closing thoughts very quickly, and then I'm going to ask Beth Sperber Ritchie to read a closing poem. And then we'll say goodbye for today. And Audrey, I don't want to forget to announce about, okay. So we looked at the very end of the parasha. The end of the parasha just, reinforces the centrality of this commandment. And it says that Abraham not only circumcised himself as a very old man, but also made sure that his his son, his one son at that time, Ishmael, completes the circumcision. And, you know, especially in this part of the Torah, it's just like you can hardly help yourself to turn the page and say, well, what happens next? What happens next? Abraham is sitting and healing from his surgery, as Shlomo alluded to. He's sitting at the opening of his tent, it says, in the heat of the day, as if to emphasize how uncomfortable he must have been. He's sitting and he's kind of absorbing this pretty significant surgery that he's just had. And it's at that moment that these three messengers come to him, and the three messengers turn out to be three rather important messengers who are coming with the news that Abraham and Sarah never thought they would hear, which is that the promise of Sarah's fertility, which is made in this parasha, in Lech Lecha, is now going to come true. They come to say that Sarah is going to conceive and a child is going to come from that conception. And we know how that all goes. She does. And there is a child. And he has his whole own interesting story. But it's somehow the ritual of Brit Milah that sits right at the center of all that, that allows that covenant, as the text says to us, to be fulfilled in the promise of the beginning of that great nation that Abraham has been told he's going to be the origin of. The future is now actually unfolding. And it seems to be somehow activated by Abraham's willingness to do this procedure on himself. And it says in the text, in the Torah text, he awoke early to perform this procedure, and so therefore the tradition is still with us that the Brit Milah is traditionally done first thing in the morning. We don't do it like for cocktail hour. I mean, some do, and nobody judges them, but there's a custom that you rise early and complete your child's Brit Milah. Okay. Before we do the final closing, and thanks for your patience here, we have some wonderful sponsorships that have already come forward. You are welcome to sponsor one of these. If you want to do so, we'll ask you to send the gift of whatever size you like to our synagogue office. And just, Audrey, am I saying this right? We're just asking you to note, to please just make a note that it's to sponsor Parashat Hashavua. Okay? Anything else, Audrey? Am I forgetting anything? Okay. One last screen share, and I couldn't help but pull up this poem. This is by the poet Ruth Bryn, who has been a very much a regular presence in Jewish poetry, and especially in the Reconstructionist movement. And I'm going to invite Beth Sperber-Ritchie to recite this for us. It's a poem I wish I had to say when my own children were born. I did come to each of those 3 times with an enormous gratitude to have a baby who was healthy on the 8th day to go through his circumcision, as I wish for all of our babies. So Beth, if you would.
To carry a child in this threatening world takes faith. To give birth to a child in this frightening world takes love. To raise a child to be a Jew takes courage. Today I celebrate the gift of life, which can be accepted only with faith, love, and courage. Today I remember Sarah, who watched Abraham when he took her only son Isaac to be sacrificed, and I remember the covenant of Abraham. Today I remember the wife of Noah, the mother of 3 sons, who, though she has no name in our Torah, witnessed the suffering of her sisters, the destruction of her brothers, and I remember the covenant of Noah. I remember that the Talmud says, one who takes a single life destroys the whole world. And I say, therefore, she who gives birth creates a whole world, and she feels a little of the divine joy of Elohim creating the earth and every living thing. Today I give my son to enter the covenant of Abraham because I have found the courage to raise him as a Jew. In this same ceremony, I pledge myself to the covenant of Noah to work for a world which will nurture life and not destroy it. All Jewish children should enter the covenant of Abraham, as a boy does symbolically when he is circumcised. Girls and boys alike need to learn Torah and commit themselves to the Jewish people. All Jews must enter the covenant of Noah, as a young woman does when she learns she is mature enough to conceive and give birth. Both women and men must promise to protect and nurture all living things. We will gather our people together to work for a world which we will not destroy with fire or nuclear winter or atomic missiles. Today we must work together for a world that is safe for my baby and all babies everywhere. A mother learns at her baby's circumcision that she suffers the pain of her child, so recently parted from her. If all men and women learn to feel the suffering of others, life can be preserved on this planet. Faith and love and courage can prevail over threats and fear and violence. Nations will study peace, and people will learn to love one another. Despite our pain, we will work for a world of peace. In trembling, we will raise our children as Jews. In fear, we will insist on celebrating life, on embracing the covenant of Noah and the covenant of Abraham, we and our children, and God helping us, our children's children.
Kol hakavod, Beth. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Shavua Tov. Have a great week. And we'll see you. We're Kabbalat Shabbat online is coming back this Friday, 6 o'clock. So if you'd like to tune in, please do so. And otherwise, please check Social Solidarity for the gajillion other things that are going on.
Rachel, could you send that poem to us?
Yes, I will figure out a way to do that. Yes.
I'm not on the listserv, but I'd like to get the poem also.
Okay. Everybody be well.